So my name is Gray Gibson, and I'm here with Mr. Ford today, and we're going to talk about just sports broadcasting. And thank you for taking the time to meet with me today, Mr. Ford.
My pleasure.
So my first question is, how did sportscasting become your passion?
Well, it started with sports being my passion. I grew up loving sports in the Bronx, New York, and New York City, and baseball was always my favorite sport. But also grew up a big basketball and football fan as well. And so I think that's where it started, just kind of growing up, enjoying sports and loving sports, and then getting interested in high school and sports journalism, which led to me deciding that I wanted to study broadcasting in college, which is what I did at Syracuse University.
Hmm. Okay. So what was your first job that you ever got, and then how'd your career look from that point on?
My first job in broadcasting.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Well, the first paying job I had in broadcasting was in the Northwest League in Yakima, Washington, as their radio broadcaster. Yakima Bears, was affiliate of the Arizona Diamondbacks at the time. It was 76 games in 80 days, and got that job at the baseball winter meetings in Boston in December of 2001 with a demo tape I made, sitting in the stands calling Mets and Yankees games at Shea Stadium and Yankee Stadium, because I was still living in New York at the time. And yeah, put together what I thought sounded the best, took it to the winter meetings in 2001, and the Yakima Bears hired me before the winter meetings were over to be their broadcaster starting in June of 2002 when their season started. And so that's really how it began. That was my first real broadcasting job.
Okay. So what would a normal day look like for you right now? Like just a normal day at work?
Well, usually, I try to get up by about 8 in the morning every day. Um, I usually do about, an hour and a half to 2 hours of work at home in the morning after I get up, which is mostly updating notes on, the starting pitchers for the next couple of days for the Astros and for whomever they're playing. Um, Updating, looking at the statistics and um, updating streaks and things like that. Making sure if it's the first day of a series, making sure I'm up to date on all the transactions for the team that the Astros are playing. Um, and various other things. Sometimes I have to, there's a new player on another team or on the Astros for that matter that I don't have any information on, so I have to get some information on them and update that in Microsoft OneNote, which is where I keep all my notes on all the players and all the teams around Major League Baseball. And so that's usually about an hour and a half, 2 hours of my day. Um, and then I usually try to go to the gym and get a workout in um, on the road at the hotel gym.
Mhm.
Um, and then usually, come back, shower, then go have lunch, and then go from lunch to the ballpark. And I usually get to the ballpark around, for a 7 o'clock game, I usually try to get there around 2:30, 3 o'clock. And once I'm at the ballpark, I usually by then, when I get to the ballpark, I can get both teams' lineups, enter those into my scorebook, look at both teams' game notes, interview Astros manager Dusty Baker, and I also sit in on the pregame media sessions for both managers if I can, for both Dusty Baker and for the opposing team's manager. Usually we'll have conversations with the other broadcasters, maybe with some players or some coaches, just depending on what's going on that day. And before you know it, it's time to eat something, and then it's first pitch and the game's going on.
So like at a press conference before the game or after the game, are you usually in at a press conference, or is that just
Well, it's usually more informal, the pregame media session. Some teams will do them in an interview room, and it'll be more like a traditional sort of press conference setting. Most of
Mhm.
the time, it's in the dugout or in the manager's office. And sometimes there are cameras there, sometimes there aren't. It just every team is different. The Astros there usually is a camera. But yeah, it's the beat writers and sometimes the broadcasters just asking questions of the manager. And I usually find I learn some good stuff. Usually pick up some things listening to the other team's manager that I won't necessarily get. Um, just on my own. Um, I also, in addition to listening to the other team's manager, I always read the other team's coverage in their local media, whether it's their local paper, whether it's the Athletic, whether it's their site on MLB.com. And I'm doing that. I'm always a series ahead. So, for example, the Astros are about to play a series with the Washington Nationals. They're off today. They start a series tomorrow with the Washington Nationals.
Mm-hmm.
And then their next series after the Nationals is against the Cincinnati Reds. So tomorrow, and I usually do this actually when I'm at lunch, I'll read articles from the Washington Post about the Washington Nationals and see what's going on. And I'll also be reading stuff maybe in the Cincinnati Enquirer or the Athletic or on the Cincinnati Reds MLB.com page to get familiar with the Cincinnati Reds since we're going to be playing them next.
Mm-hmm.
But so, yeah, I like to listen in on the manager sessions. And of course, you get to know some of the managers as well. And as far as listening to the Astros manager session, for me, what that's about is I know I interview the manager and usually we'll get a chance to ask him questions off the record. But I also want to know what he's telling the media at large, like what's public, because he'll tell me some things. And this isn't just Dusty Baker. This is every manager I've ever worked with. They'll tell me some things that they may not want out there publicly, or they may tell me something one way and then say it differently to the media because what they're telling me is what the real deal is, where they're telling the media, not that they're not lying to the media, but they may not be telling them everything because you can't necessarily reveal everything depending on what's going on. So, I like to know what's being said to the media.
Mm-hmm. So are you in Houston right now?
I'm in Houston right now. Yes.
And you guys, who are you guys playing next? You said, was it Washington?
Yep. The Washington Nationals starting tomorrow.
So starting when?
Starting tomorrow.
So are you leaving Houston tomorrow or how does that work?
No, we're in there. It's a homestand. It's a 9-game homestand starting tomorrow against the Nationals, Reds, and Mets. We were just on the road. Got back last night from Cleveland.
Okay. So you're traveling, like, how often would you say you're traveling usually?
So usually the way the schedule works, there are variations, but generally it's a week on the road followed by a week at home.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have 3 city trips, which will be a week and a half. Like the Astros have a 3-team homestand, that's a week and a half. But generally speaking, it's a week home, week away.
Is that like been difficult for you or are you cool with all the traveling?
Well, obviously, it'd be nice to have a job where, I got to spend more time at home than I do. I have a child who just turned 13.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, during the season, it's a lot harder for me to spend time, with my daughter. So,
Mm-hmm.
that makes things difficult at time to time. But we make the best of it. And I think it's also important for, I have my dream job and I love what I do. And I think it's important for, my child to see that because I want my child to pursue their dreams and go after their dream job. And so I think that's very important, even though it does lead to me not spending as much time, with my child as most parents would get to, most
Mm-hmm.
dads would get to. But I also enjoy going to different cities, going to different ballparks. I enjoy traveling in general.
Mm-hmm.
And there, a lot of these cities are, these cities we go to, some of them every year now with the new schedule with the National League cities every other year. And so, you get familiar with certain places, you get familiar with certain spots, even sometimes you branch out, learn something new about a place, especially if you have an off day there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I do, it's one of those things. It's the greatest thing about the job and can be the toughest thing about the job to travel.
Mm-hmm. How long is baseball's off season? Is it like 3 or 4 months of the year?
Well, if you don't make the playoffs, that's generally 4.5 months or so of an off season. But the Astros have gone deep in the postseason the last few years, so then
Yeah.
your off season is a little shorter. We're looking at more of a 3-month off season. The Astros, the World Series last year ended on November 5th, and the first spring training game was like February 22nd, I think it was. So yeah, that definitely cuts into your off season, but it's a nice problem to have. I mean, love calling postseason games and seeing the Astros be successful.
Hmm. So what does it look like for you in the off season when there's no baseball to talk about really?
Well, I use the off season. I always take a month off where I don't really do anything baseball related after the Astro season ends, and then I start updating my notes. Like I said, I have Microsoft OneNote. I start updating those in the off season,
Hmm.
and I've also done some college basketball the last few years on TV for ESPN. It's usually winds up being about a dozen games or so. So I'll do some of those, and usually try to travel a little bit. Um, Go home to New York City, where my mom still is, and a lot of my family is. Usually, we'll go home either for Thanksgiving or Christmas, sometimes both. Um, and maybe try to get some other trips in. Last year, I went to Amsterdam right after the Astros were in the World Series.
Hmm.
This year for Thanksgiving, I'm going to go to Hawaii. So yeah, I try to do, the schedule. You spend so long on, you know, someone else's schedule. It's nice to be on your own schedule for a few
Hmm.
months.
Yeah. So what would you, well, obviously you're traveling a lot, but what is it like living in Houston for the most part, being there?
I mean, I love living in Houston. I've been here 10 years now. The first time I ever visited Houston was when the Astros flew me in to interview for their radio broadcaster position.
Hmm.
And, Houston, New York City will always be home. That's where I grew up.
Hmm.
And I still have a very strong connection and affinity for New York City.
Hmm.
But Houston's also become home. I love the diversity. I love that there's plenty to do. There's a lot going on. I love that there's no real winter. And it's a big city, and everything that comes with being in a big city is part of what I like about being in Houston.
Hmm. So, what advice would you give to people who are trying to come into this industry?
Well, I think it's important to make sure of a few things. One, you want to be well rounded. Yeah, I mean, you love sports, you love baseball, you love basketball, whatever the case may be,
Hmm.
but that can't be your only focus. It's good to have other interests and to cultivate other interests, whether it's music, whether it's museums, whether it's current events, whatever the case may be.
Hmm.
It just makes you a more well-rounded human. And also, there's a pretty good chance that early in your career, you may be asked to do things other than sports. Like my second job in broadcasting in Kalamazoo, Michigan, worked for a radio station group. I had to do news anchoring and reporting in addition to sports play-by-play.
Hmm.
Being well-rounded really helps. I also think it's important to the learn about the history, learn about some of the past happenings in the sports that you cover. That knowledge is extremely important to understand the past and understand the history of the games you're covering. That should be part of your institutional knowledge.
Hmm.
Um, like I feel like if you're a baseball broadcaster, you should know things like, in 2005, the Montreal Expos moved to DC and became the Washington Nationals, or,
Hmm.
the American League expanded in 1977, adding the Toronto Blue Jays and the Seattle Mariners, or, the, um, the Atlanta Braves started off in Boston, then moved to Milwaukee, and then moved to Atlanta in 1966. Just, I think things like that should be part of your institutional knowledge. Or, hey, Hank Aaron hit 755 home runs. That was the record until Barry Bonds broke it with 762 home runs, or, things like that. Not just numbers, but also just understanding the history of the sport and being aware of, you know, what has happened in the sport before you started following it yourself.
Hmm. So what made you want to pick baseball versus all the other sports to cover?
Well, baseball has always driven everything that I've done because that's my favorite sport, and it always has been. But I love other sports too. I've done a lot of college basketball. As I mentioned, I've done some for ESPN the last few years. I did
Hmm.
college basketball on the radio for about 10 years for a bunch of different schools.
Hmm.
Once upon a time, did a lot of high school basketball. I actually used to referee some high school and middle school basketball once upon a time. I've done football as well. Yeah, I like doing different sports.
Mm-hmm.
I'm someone who just enjoys sports, whether it's broadcasting them or watching them as a fan. And I don't even necessarily have to be a fan of both teams. I just like watching a good game, or even, when I've gone to Europe, I go to European soccer matches, and I'm not a soccer person, but I enjoy that. That's fun to see other people passionate about something else. So, um, yeah, baseball has driven everything that I've done. It's definitely my favorite sport, but I'm just a sports fan in general.
Mm-hmm. What was your like biggest struggle you would say in your career that you've had?
I think just being in the minor leagues for 7 years, and the last 2 or 3 years of that, wondering what I have to do to get a shot at a big league job, and wondering, hey, is anybody even paying attention? Like, does anybody even know who I am? Like, how do I increase my visibility? And also trying to figure out, how good am I at this? What do I need to do to get better? I recognized even then that, there are a lot of good broadcasters who won't get a shot at a major league baseball job, and not necessarily through any fault of their own. They're just, they're only 30 or so jobs, and the people who get them tend to stay in them for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just not a lot of turnover. And I knew that. But I knew that I wanted to put myself in the best position possible to get one of those jobs. And so I think that was probably the biggest struggle for me, is figuring out how to do that, and figuring out how to get better, and finding people who could give me constructive criticism. Because I knew I wasn't horrible at it,
Mm-hmm.
but I wasn't sure how good I was. I thought I was pretty good, but I knew that I could probably get better. And so that was probably my biggest challenge professionally, is just kind of navigating through that and figuring that out.
So how did you move up from minor to make, like, was there an event or was there a moment that you just got more visibility, or what caused you to make the jump?
So for me, my last couple of years in Binghamton as the radio guy for the AA Binghamton Mets at the time,
Mm-hmm.
um, I sent my demo CD of my play-by-play to every major league team's director of broadcasting. I had all the team's media guides, so I just looked up whoever was in charge of broadcasting and sent my stuff to them. A lot of them didn't respond. Many of them responded with form letters, saying they didn't have anything available. Because what I sent out my demo, and I said, I'd be interested in, possibly filling in if you ever need to fill in. And I also said, even absent of that, I'd still appreciate any sort of feedback you had on my work.
Mm-hmm.
So there were two people who listened and sent me constructive feedback. One was Sue Rayson, who at the time was the director of broadcasting for the then Florida Marlins. And
Mm-hmm.
the other was Rob Brooks, who was the director of broadcasting and still is the director of broadcasting for the Philadelphia Phillies. Um, and Sue passed away several years ago. Rob and I still keep in touch a little bit, and we see each other when our teams play each other. Um, but they both gave me constructive feedback. Basically, the message I got from both of them was, "You're on the right track. You just need to get more reps." Rob gave me a few pointers, like making sure I always address the pitch. Um, not just say what happened, but let people know the pitch is coming.
Mm-hmm.
And being more detailed in my call to make it more of a radio call as opposed to a television call. Um, and without the advice of both Rob and Sue, I would have never gotten to the big leagues. And then the
Mm-hmm.
other thing that really helped was, um, after 4 years in Binghamton and 7 years in the minors, I got hired to be the Kansas City Royals reporter for their flagship radio station in Kansas City,
Mm-hmm.
610 a.m. KCSP. And I did pregame and postgame call-in shows for every Royals game. I was at all their home games. I watched all their road games on TV from the radio station, and covered those. Um, and I think that just helped me get a better understanding for what it was like to be around a major league team every day. And I think it also gave me a lot more confidence that, yeah, I can be a big league broadcaster. I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of just getting an opportunity and putting myself out there. And even when I was in Kansas City, I would still make new demo material. I would sit in an empty broadcast booth at Kauffman Stadium in Kansas City, and a handful of times a year, I'd bring a recorder and record myself doing play-by-play of the game. And that's what I would send to teams. That's what I sent to the Astros, what got me hired with the Astros.
Mm-hmm.
So, I always knew that's where I wanted to be, play-by-play voice for a major league team. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, sending stuff out to every director of broadcasting in the big leagues and getting some feedback, and also being around the Kansas City Royals and just learning what it's like to be around a major league team and cover a major league team. Probably the two biggest things that helped me, along with just getting reps and getting opportunities to be on the air.
Mm-hmm. So would you say in this business of like sports broadcasting, is experience more important? Or if you're just talented, even if you don't have much experience, if you're talented, you'll get noticed? Or is it experience is a huge part of it? Like you need to have.
I mean, you need both. I mean, the only way you're going to get better, no matter how much talent you have, the
Mm-hmm.
only way you're going to get better is by calling games. And everybody is not very good when they start. Some are less worse than others when they start, but no one is very good at broadcasting when they start.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you keep getting reps. You keep getting on the air, not just play by play, but just being on the air helps you get better, become more polished, and understand what it takes to be on the air. But that's the biggest thing, is just getting that experience. Talent will only take you so far.
Mm-hmm.
But if talent combined with experience, I mean, nothing can beat that, really.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's all the questions I have today. Thank you for taking your time. I really appreciate it. And it was good talking with you.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Greg.